My name is Trula Fountaine, and I am a web developer at CapU University, and I've been here for almost 30 years, 27 years. I started as a student. I took the Infotech program when I was 38 years old, so I was the maturest student in the room, pretty much. It was a 10-month program, and but it was a crazy number of credits, like 2 years worth of credits in 10 months. It was like fast track. And right out of the classroom, one of my instructors came and said, there's a posting here at CAP, I think you should go for it. It was in marketing at the time, but it was web development in marketing. And then as time went on, it was more evident that it was more IT related work, that I needed to work closer with the people that did the servers and things like that. So then I was moved from marketing into IT. I mainly take care of the content management system, which now houses 3 websites. So the main website, Frontlines, our intranet, and the library website. And so I manage that software, but I also create content types, like how things look and where on pages where they go. I don't write content. So marketing looks after a lot of the public content, so I support them, and I create things that they want to use. I started when it was a college, right? So I went through the time that's transitioned to a university, and changing like 3 logos along the way. It's changed a lot. I think the culture here has changed quite a bit. It used to be that we would know each other more and we'd get to know the students, because I don't personally work with students. I work more with staff. We did a lot more work with students sometimes, and their creative pieces as well. It's grown, of course, because we have now the fancy BOSA Center, and we've got the Children's Center, and that's all great. And as you know, we're going through a big flux, right? So I feel like it's a good time for me to, just kind of document things and make things tidy, and then retire to my own projects, my other things that I want to do. So it's not really retiring, it's just kind of shifting focus. Oh, well, I did it before I went to school. So I started working in the darkroom for the Campbell River Museum, doing archival photos. And so I, was processing, copying people's family photo albums and things like that, and, looking at the faces of these people and wondering what their life was like. And I also had lived in the bush, so like north of Quadra Island. So I recognized the lifestyles too. The curator of the museum, she had started a project. The first one was called Partners. And that's when she realized there were no stories about women on the North Coast. It was all, fishermen and logging and things like that. But the women were silent. And so she started her first project, and then we got more grants to do the 3 other projects. And so I was so blessed to be able to be asked to kind of lead and be part of that beautiful project, where we got grants from women's equality, like government grants and things like that to do it. Of course, we ran out of grant money. But it was a labor of love anyway, and so we completed 3 videos in that series. And so it came kind of from the darkroom and the archival into interviewing the women, some women that were still alive, that lived in that time. So that's 1915 to 1945. So that was really, I was always just drawn to those faces. I'd see them come up in the developer, and just kind of like, who are you, and what do you have to say? And so that's kind of where it all started there. if you don't mind, I'll just kind of shift that a little bit, because the work that I do changes so much. So I took the Infotech program, right? That was a generalist program. I did learn good foundations, but things are so different now that who knew? Like, nobody knew the direction. The internet was new. People were still trying to figure out how to make money on the internet at that time, right? So what would I tell myself? It's going to change. Things are going to change, and you're not going to know, but I'm so glad I did it. I think that it was a wonderful thing to do. I was very fortunate in how I got here at 38 years old, and it helped me for the rest of my life. I walk into a photo finishing place and it's that smell, even though it's slightly different, but it's still similar. I liked the tactile. I mean, I used to cut paper from a roll, like photographic paper, from a roll with a guillotine cutter in the pitch black, you know? And so those kinds of things, like that skill set of just doing what needs to be done and how it was done then, it's a lost art. Of course, my whole line was always transforming into digital, from the darkroom to here. So when I first went to school here, I was pretty new to computers. I got a Mac, and I mean, I had done a lot of things with, but mostly word processing, not digital stuff so much, and things were evolving. I mean, we started with the big discs and floppy disks and things like that, right? But one thing that was good for me was Photoshop. The metaphor of Photoshop is darkroom talk, darkroom language. And so I was able to fairly quickly figure out Photoshop. I'd never used it before, and it was a 10-month program. It was go, 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 and you had to be able to optimize images and make decent images to display. So I knew that part. Photoshop, you're dodging and burning, and it's talking density, and it's talking all of those things that I used in a darkroom. So that was the best thing for me. And so for images, and it was more like documentary stuff. That's what I thought I would end up doing, not web stuff, which is still storytelling, right? It's just a different medium in a way, yeah. Well, through the Campbell River Museum, through the curator, and she had approached me and said, hey, because she had done the first version, and wanted to jump it up, because the first version was prior to 1915. And then we went 1915, like through to the Second World War, right? And so that's how I had the pleasure. I have a story for that, and it ended up being the thesis of the video. And in this case, we did the videos while writing the script. I came to realize that women built the towns, like Courtenay and all of Comox and Port Hardy, and a lot of those logging camps at the time are now towns today. And there's part of it in the video, there's that part where they decide to bring women into the logging camp to cook, to make food. And I remember the guy saying, well, now the food is clean and the place is clean, and women made a difference. And the men would, before that, they'd come for a little while, but then they'd leave and they wouldn't come back to work, right, to the logging camp. And women started coming, and then eventually families started coming. Then it created a community. And it was the women, it was bringing women into that space that created, in the end, a town, like a full-on community. And so, yeah, it was women taking care of the men who were away from home and bringing them in and creating families. And that, to me, was the thesis. That was the end story for me, was what women did. Oh yeah, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal for me personally. One thing that I learned in doing the interviews with these women, I'll start there and say, I really had to put my feminist attitude on the side. I had to recognize that and listen. I had to be a listener and try to and understand their time, right? When I called them, it was like a cold call at first. We had a list at the museum of people, and so I would call up the women on the list, and I had questions just like you do, and it was like, hi, you know, we're doing this project and we'd love to talk to you about you know, your life. And they'd say, oh, I did nothing. They'd say, you want to talk to my husband, he did all the things, right? And I'd say, but you know, I used to live in Wyatt Bay, and I know you lived in such and such a bay. We lived really close, and I would just talk to them from that perspective and say, you know, I understand what lifestyle you had. And then they would say, okay. And then I would go to their door. I'd give them the questions ahead of time so that they'd be prepared, because we wanted to ask questions about childbirth and medicinal stuff and isolation and all of those things. And some of them were not the easiest questions, so we wanted them to be prepared, and they could say they didn't want to talk about that or whatever. And so I'd go to their door with at the time, my little cassette tape and my lavalier, you know, and my video camera. Did we have video cameras? They were huge. They were really big, so I didn't always take them, but I had mostly just my cassette. They'd lived a very tough life, and they were elderly, right? So they're kind of slow to come to the door. And then I figured out that if I asked them if they had a photo album, because that was always my thing too, you know, and so then I would just sit at their feet, and we would look at these photos, and they would start just telling me stories, and the stories would often come into my list of questions anyway, or they would open up those questions. I learned a lot about their loneliness. You know, they were often women alone, like the only woman, I mean, in a logging camp, responsible for feeding a bunch of men early on. And then when they started having children, they were responsible for their children's education and their well-being and all of that kind of stuff. This one woman comes to mind, and her husband had a tugboat, and she did the radio calls, like for you know, navigation kind of thing, and come here, come there. And he would speak to her so mean, so mean. And when I was interviewing her, she had recordings of the things, like old cassettes, right? And he was gone by the time we were doing this interview. He was passed. And we listened to that, and he was calling her every name. But she was like, oh, I miss him so much. And I was like, wow, like, yeah, I get it, you know? I really get it. It's a different time and a different expectation from partners and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, there were quite a few things, like even childbirth, you know, they were happy to give up their health care to somebody else because they looked after everybody else normally. So here is an opportunity. Nobody has to, or now somebody's going to look after me. So, you know, those kinds of things where they would have to go to a hospital for like 6 weeks before the baby was born and things like that. And yeah, tough ladies. Well, that's kind of two different things, isn't it? Because the university website is storytelling about the university, isn't it? So for that, it's more information architecture, right? And so it's just logic. It's like, this makes sense. And so when you get into things like UX, you know, people finding information. So now we're becoming more of a storyteller through being a wayfinder. what is the best way, or how can I help people find what they're looking for? And that, I guess that is essentially storytelling in a way, isn't it? Yeah. Especially now that I'm retiring, I really see the importance of making sure documentation is up to date, that things are documented and that they are cared for. Of course, it's my job, but it's also a personal point of view as well that I want. It's like my baby, you know, it's like making sure that it's cared for properly and that it lasts. Like, after all this time, I don't know how many times people have said to me, hey, do you know where this thing was? Like 3 websites ago. Like, I've redesigned our CAP website 6 times. But there was this thing, and sometimes people know that I've been here long enough, and it's not like we keep everything, because we're not really a storage unit. So, you know, but it's been a few times that I've actually, from like the Reg office, they're like, do you know where that document is? And I'm like, well, let me see. And we go to the Wayback Machine and navigate through the Wayback Machine, and sure enough, I can find things. And, you know, that's the neat thing about being somewhere for so long, is I do have stewardship in that way of kind of knowing a lot of evolution. I think all of the redesigns, you know, those are always quite a big effort, huge effort, and it takes a lot of people. That 6 websites is a lot to see. Yeah, and sometimes, like for the intranet, I would do that by myself, and that was quite challenging for sure. So I'm kind of proud that I managed to get through those things and to do a relatively good job, I think. And plus training people, and training is not my favorite thing to do, but it needs to be done. And so so I'm glad I pushed through a lot of even things that I didn't like, you know. It's storytelling, isn't it? I think, you know, from doing graphic design, and then the darkroom work, creativity. There's been always curious. Like I used to say I was a scientist, you know, because there's science in the darkroom, and there's science in cooking, and there's science in creating art. If you paint or whatever you do, there's science is part of, and science is creative, in my opinion. And so so that thread of science and creativity, I think, came all the way through curiosity, art. My dad was an artist, and so I was raised with with thinking like that, you know, that life was art. Writing. So I've been writing a few books. I've got a few things on the back burner that I'm not sure which one will take my biggest attention. I'm very grateful that I do have inspiration beyond working at CAP. So that's why, sure, I'm retiring from CAP, but I'm certainly not retiring from a creative life. I like to paint and draw as well, and so I've got some things where when I have more energy, like after working 9 to 5 kind of thing, you know, it kind of sucks a lot of my energy away from those other things. So really that is what I'm looking forward to, is kind of opening up that creative world again. So this was the day that we presented the video in the City Hall of Campbell River to the women that we interviewed. We invited them to come. And so that's me. The biggest smile that I've ever had. I just love that day, and it will always be one of my favorite days. And this was a staged photo, of course, but in those days, photography was, you know, a special day to have your photo taken. This was a family photo. And I just love this photo so much. This is one of the earlier women. So this would have been from the very first video. And And so she was one of the first pioneer women, but I just love how she's dressed and how fancy. These were the video covers, so that was the first one, and then these three, I don't know if they matter to you, but these were so they're VHS. So we did it all analog at that time. If everything was analog, and I was really lucky to work with a guy who worked for Czech TV, and so he had a lot of editing experience. So he taught me editing. I mean, we worked shoulder to shoulder for days and days, putting all of the interviews together, and so I ended up being like the producer, I guess, of it as well. Museum flicks. I mean, when you look at these people, look at them. They're having a picnic. It's May Day, and they're having a picnic, and it's so fancy, you know, with the teacups and the white tablecloth on the grass, right? I just love that about these people, and that's kind of the storytelling started there.